Hi, my name is Miranda, and I'm doing ELL Evaluation. So students sometimes speak with dialects or difference in language that are related to their culture. Here's my professional opinion on how these different impact assessment approaches in oral language. So, in Great Britain and in Kansas, there are two different dialects. And the dialects is how someone pronounces something or how they talk. So Great Britain is different than Kansas. So they're different because they pronounce words different and their accents are different. So in Great Britain you'll hear one thing and then in Kansas you'll hear another thing, but it's the same word. And in America we decide to call it mainstream English, and that's an English that we have as the standard English, American English. And then number 4 is the difference in Spanish and English. So a lot of the students who come into the school are students who speak Spanish, and that's the main language. That is the other language, and then English is supposed to be the first of what we're teaching in schools. And sometimes Spanish speakers reverse the language that they're talking about. So because it translates different. So then in Spanish it would say the car red is mine, and in English we would say the red car is mine. So when you translate it, it's different in Spanish and English. So that might be hard on some of the testing. Professional fail to assess language competence. So when professionals are assessing students, the language that they're using isn't the same language as the student, is what their main language and how they could answer questions. Under compensate, dialect and mistake dialect difference from language disorders. So because of the dialects, some students may be in the category where they are qualified for other types of services and things like that. And it's not necessarily that they need it, it's just the way the dialects is. And so they may understand it in their language, but not in English. And then there's decoding errors from the professionals as well. And so, like, going back to Spanish and English, the pen and pin, they sound the same, but in Spanish it's not the same. So like V as in Victor and B get confused a lot, and so when they say like Victor, instead of Victor, Spanish speakers will say Victor. It's just because the letters are different. So there's 24 consonants in English, and there's 14 vowels in English, and then in Spanish there's 18 consonants and 5 vowels. So that's where the difference is, and so that's when there's words pronounced differently. And so when you don't speak English, the spelling sounds different than how you write it down. So like phone, you would think F, but it's not really F because for English, there's special types of things that we have to follow, so that's a PH sound instead of the F sound. And then, like I said, translation is different when the translator is asking questions to the student. Students' sentences will be said back in their own way. So, like, if you tell a student a certain sentence to say back to you, like, for example, the Black English, they add S a lot to all of the words, and so it makes it plural instead of it just being one. And then assess students' proficiency, and so instead of using their language, the professional uses the English language. So what are interventions options? are available to students who are English learners if they need additional services. So one is there's always a para in the classroom, and usually the para will speak Spanish since that is the dominant language. And then in the classes, the student can be seated in a correct way of easier to help. Could be in the front of the classroom, could be in the back, whereas that's where you constantly walk as a teacher. And then positive reinforcement. So if the student is struggling to make a sentence or make the sentence make sense, instead of saying like, no, that's not right, don't say that, or that's not how we say it here, you would just simply correct them in a nice manner. We're kind of repeating what they say, but just making the sentence make sense. And then students can have read aloud options, like on the computer. There's a microphone and you can do that, or you could simply help them by repeating until they understand what the directions are or the content of the work. And so then there's also a silent period that may take place, and that means when there's so much information given to the student that they might just kind of step back and watch and listen, where they're not so much involved in the conversation or involved in the lesson. So cognitive academic language proficiency is another thing. And then communication practice, so knowing what's allowed and what's not allowed, kind of like social. What are some things that you can and can't say? And then bilingual education is obviously the first intervention. It's in the instructions, so knowing what to do for the assignment, the content area, and then the English language that is learned. So why are students who are culturally diverse sometimes over and under-identified? So an example of under-identified is when a student doesn't qualify for special education service and they don't get identified until there's no success in the classroom. So that kind of takes some time depending on the student and how quickly they show they need extra help. And then special education doesn't access in the home language, so when they're testing, it should be done in the language that the student understands more of, and not say English as a second language, so not English. And an inadequate comprehensive assessment, so that's the same thing. So giving tests that aren't to the level of the student and that the student can't respond. The student can't respond when there's a certain specific answer that the professional is looking for. And then language proficiency doesn't give accurate info, and that's the first step they usually take. And so the proficiency may be good, but it doesn't mean that they're well off in the classroom where they don't need help. It may be where they do need help in the classroom. So there are some reasons or some ways that some students can be overqualified or underqualified for special education while being ELL. Thank you.